Late on Saturday, August 26, 1961, two women who lived near Gail Russell realized that they had not seen her for several days. That absence was enough to worry them. They went to her small residence in West Los Angeles, in the Brentwood area, and checked on her. What they found inside would become one of the quietest and saddest endings in the history of old Hollywood. Gail Russell was lying on the floor. Near her was an empty vodka bottle, and police would later report other empty bottles in the rooms around her. At first, the news services said only that the 36-year-old actress appeared to have died of natural causes. The fuller medical picture would come later. What was already clear was simpler and, in its own way, more devastating. A woman who had once been one of Paramount's most striking young stars had died alone, only a few months after her final film reached theaters. If you were an American who went to the movies in the 1940s, you knew her face. You had seen it in fan magazines. You had seen it staring out at you from a haunted house in The Uninvited. You had seen it beside John Wayne in Angel and the Batman, where she could hold a close-up with a kind of still, inward attention that most performers spent years trying to learn. For a brief period, Hollywood photographed her as if it had found something that would last forever. But Gail Russell's life was not built for the machinery that surrounded her. Her fame came early. Her fear came with it. And by the time the country learned she was dead, much of the industry that had once promoted her had already moved on. This is her story. And I want to tell you up front, some parts of it are very well documented. The films are still here. The court records are still here. The newspaper reports are still here. But other parts, especially the private ones, live in the fog of Hollywood memory. And where the record is thin, I will say so. I'm not going to pretend to know what I do not know. I'm going to tell you what happened, as best as we can piece it together from the sources that survived. And I'm going to let the silences speak for themselves. Because in the end, the silences are a part of the story too. She was born Betty Gail Russell on September 21, 1924, in Chicago, Illinois. Her parents were George and Gladys Russell. When Gail was a teenager, the family moved west to California, joining the enormous flow of families who came to the Los Angeles area looking for work and a different future. Her father eventually found employment there, and Gail went to school in Southern California. Long before anyone called her a movie star, the people around her noticed something else about her. She was painfully shy. Not movie star shy. Not the kind of shyness that publicity departments like to turn into charm. By the accounts that survive, she could be genuinely overwhelmed by unfamiliar people and unfamiliar situations. She later described an almost physical form of self-consciousness, a tightening that made ordinary social encounters feel like ordeals. But she had one thing that did not frighten her. She could draw. From childhood, Gail sketched constantly. Faces, objects, landscapes, whatever she had in front of her. She became serious enough about art that, before Hollywood intervened, her ambition was to become a commercial artist. She imagined a working life built around drawing and painting, not premieres and interviews. For a girl who disliked being watched, that dream makes perfect sense. She wanted to make images, not become one. That is one of the central ironies of her life. The quality that would make Hollywood notice her was the quality she herself had done nothing to cultivate. The way she looked when other people looked at her. And the thing she actually loved, making pictures with her own hands, would remain private, something she returned to whenever the public life became too loud. She wanted, in the private way that quiet children want things, to have a life in which she could sit at a table with a pencil and be left alone. That is not the life she got. What happened instead is one of those small Hollywood accidents that changed everything. She was a student at Santa Monica High School, and there, according to accounts from her classmates and later Paramount studio publicity, she had become locally famous simply for being beautiful. Her classmates gave her a nickname. They called her the Hedy Lamarr of Santa Monica High. That is not a phrase invented for a movie. That is a real phrase, used by real teenagers in the early 1940s, about a real girl who was walking through their hallways and probably wishing she was invisible. That nickname traveled. In a town where every studio in Hollywood had scouts looking for the next face, a nickname like that traveled fast. And sometime in 1942, when Gail was 17 years old, Paramount Pictures came looking for her. Now, here is where I want to slow down for a moment, because the story of how she was discovered has been told a dozen different ways over the decades, and some of those versions are more colorful than they are accurate. The reliable version, the one that the studio's own publicity materials and later biographers agree on, is that she was already known through her school, and Paramount arranged to test her. That is it. There was no dramatic scene in a drugstore. There was no scout at a lunch counter. The truth is quieter, and honestly, it is stranger. She was a 17-year-old girl who had done nothing to seek out fame, and fame simply arrived at her door. She did not want it. That is worth saying twice. She did not want it. She wanted to draw. When Paramount offered her a screen test, the story her family later told is that she was terrified. She almost said no. According to those family accounts, her mother pushed her forward. The family needed the money, and Gail, being the kind of girl she was, did not know how to say no to her mother. So she went to the test. Now, there is a reason to be careful here, because we have no film of that first screen test, and the descriptions we do have come from later Paramount publicity, which was, let us be honest, in the business of making things sound magical. But the outcome is not in dispute. Paramount signed her. They gave her a 7-year contract. They gave her the name Gail Russell, her actual middle name, dressed up for the marquee. And they put her, at 17 years old, into the machinery. And the machinery, if we are being frank, was not designed for a girl like Gail Russell. The Hollywood studio system of the early 1940s was a factory. That is not an insult, that is a description. It produced films the way General Motors produced cars, on a schedule, on a budget, with interchangeable parts. Actors were part of the parts. They were signed young, trained fast, dressed up, photographed, sent from picture to picture, and expected to deliver. The system worked, in a rough, industrial way, for people who could handle it. It worked for the extroverts, for the ambitious, for the young people who had been dreaming of movie stardom since they were children. It did not work for people who were terrified of being looked at. Her first credited film was the small comedy Henry Aldrich Gets Glamour, released in 1943. She was still a teenager and had almost no practical acting experience. What the studio had was a face it believed could photograph beautifully. What Gail did not yet have was the confidence, technique, or emotional armor that the factory demanded from contract players. The surviving accounts agree on the central point. Performing in front of a camera frightened her badly. The fear was not a publicity invention added later to explain her life. Directors and colleagues remembered it. She could struggle to get through lines, become overwhelmed, and retreat into tears. Even the basic routine of a set, dozens of people watching, lights bearing down, a director waiting, money being spent every minute, could become an ordeal. It is important, though, to put the beginning of the alcohol story in the right place. The strongest first-hand account does not place the decisive moment on her very first picture. It comes from Lewis Allen, the director of The Uninvited. Allen remembered that Gail had not been a drinker before that production, and that, during the difficult shoot, the head of the makeup department suggested alcohol as a way to calm her. That distinction matters. It takes the story out of the realm of a vague Hollywood legend and puts it into a specific production, with a specific witness who directed her. It also makes the tragedy more ordinary. Nobody had to set out to destroy her. A frightened young actress had a problem that was interfering with the day's work. Someone offered a quick solution. The solution worked quickly enough to be repeated. That is how a dangerous association can begin. Fear appears. A drink reduces the fear. The scene gets finished. Everyone goes home. The next day, the same problem returns, and now there is a remembered answer to it. In the short term, the picture moves forward. In the long term, the person can begin to organize her life around the thing that makes the fear temporarily disappear. No one involved had to imagine where that pattern might lead 18 years later. They were thinking about the next setup, the next page of dialogue, the next day's schedule. The studio system was extremely good at solving the problems immediately in front of it. It was much less interested in what those solutions might do to the people who had to live with them after the cameras stopped. That is the uncomfortable part of Gail Russell's story. Her alcoholism did not spring into existence because Hollywood alone created it, and it would be too simple to blame one anonymous person for everything that followed. Addiction does not work that neatly. But the historical record does support the idea that alcohol became tied to her professional fear very early, during the production that made her a star. And once that connection was established, it proved terribly hard to break. And here is where her story starts to get complicated. Because in spite of everything, in spite of the fear, in spite of what was happening to her behind the scenes, Gail Russell was actually good. Really good. When she managed to get through the fear, the camera loved her in a way it only loves a very small number of faces in each generation. She had huge, dark, expressive eyes. She had a quality of stillness that most young actresses simply do not have. She was, whether she wanted to be or not, a natural. Paramount noticed. And in 1944, they cast her in the film that would make her a star. It was called The Uninvited. If you have never seen it, and you like classic ghost stories, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is quiet, it is elegant, it is genuinely eerie. Milland plays a music critic who buys a haunted house on the coast of Cornwall, and Gail Russell plays the young woman connected to the ghost that lives in it. She was only 18 during much of the filming, and 19 by the time the picture reached audiences. She had been in the business for barely a year, and in spite of the fear Lewis Allen remembered, she became one of the film's most memorable presences. The critics noticed too. When The Uninvited came out in 1944, trade reviews and critics repeatedly singled out the young actress. The picture itself was a success, and Paramount suddenly had proof that the shy girl it had signed could hold the screen in a major production. The same shoot that had exposed how frightened she was also established how valuable she might become. Lewis Allen's later recollection makes that contradiction almost painfully clear. He remembered a performer who could manage only a limited amount of dialogue before the pressure overwhelmed her. Milland, according to Allen, worked patiently with her on lines. And it was during this production, Allen said, that the suggestion of alcohol appeared as a way of steadying her. The exact daily pattern cannot be reconstructed now, and it would be wrong to pretend that every difficult scene was preceded by a drink. What can be said is that alcohol entered her working life at precisely the moment success was beginning to accelerate. Paramount responded to success in the way studios did. It kept her busy. Around the same period, and in the years immediately after, she appeared in Lady in the Dark, Our Hearts Were Young and Gay, Salty O'Rourke, The Unseen, The Bachelor's Daughters, and other studio pictures. She moved from role to role while the publicity department turned her face into a recognizable product. Fan magazines photographed her. Columnists wrote about her. The studio had discovered that the very stillness produced partly by her inward nature could look extraordinary on camera. Outside the camera's frame, the same qualities were much harder to live with. She did not become a conventional Hollywood social creature simply because her photograph appeared in magazines. Accounts of her private life consistently describe someone who preferred home, art, books, music, and a small circle of familiar people to the constant exposure expected of a young star. And that meant the central conflict of her early career never really went away. The more successful Gail Russell became, the more often she had to enter the environment that frightened her. The more the camera loved her, the more the studio needed her in front of it. Fame did not cure the fear. It increased the number of occasions on which she had to overcome it. Alcohol, once connected to relief, was a brutally convenient tool. It was legal, common, socially accepted, and everywhere in mid-century Hollywood. For many people, it remained a social habit. For Gail, it became entangled with the one thing she had to do for a living and dreaded doing. That is a very different relationship with the substance. Nobody around her in the middle of the 1940s could see the whole arc from the vantage point we have now. They saw a young actress who was difficult one day and luminous the next. They saw a production problem that could sometimes be managed. They saw a star whose pictures were making money. Gail, meanwhile, had to go home after the set and live inside the nervous system that the studio could leave behind at the gate. The pictures got made. The publicity photographs were printed. The career moved forward. And Gail Russell, in her private hours, went home and tried to be a person again, and found it harder and harder each time. In 1946, she was loaned out to a small independent production. It was a Western. A modest Western with a modest budget, being made by an actor who had decided to try his hand at producing his own films. His name was John Wayne. She had never met him. She was terrified. And what happened on that set in the summer of 1946 would give her, for the first time in her professional life, a friend. A real one. The kind of friend she had not known she was allowed to have. And it would begin one of the most quietly moving stories in the history of the old Hollywood. A story that most people, even today, do not fully know. Because John Wayne, whatever you think of him, whatever politics you attach to his name, did something for Gail Russell that almost nobody else in that town ever did for her. He noticed her, and he did not look away. Let me tell you what happened during the location work in the American Southwest in 1946, when the shy young actress from Santa Monica worked with the man in the wide-brimmed hat. Because that is where this story stops being only sad and starts being something more complicated, something more human, something that, in the end, might be the truest thing about her whole life. The production was called Angel and the Bad Man. It was John Wayne's first project as a producer. He had been a star for 7 years, ever since Stagecoach in 1939, and he had gotten tired of being told what pictures to make. So he had started his own small production company, and he had picked a modest script by a writer named James Edward Grant, and he had cast himself in the lead role of a gunfighter who gets shot and taken in by a family of Quakers. And for the role of the young Quaker woman who nurses him back to health and eventually changes him, he needed someone specific. He needed someone with an inner stillness, someone who could carry a scene by doing almost nothing. He picked Gail Russell. Now, there is a reason to be careful here, because there is a version of this story that gets told in some of the older gossip columns, and it is not the version I am going to tell you. Some of those columns hinted, over the years, that there had been a romance between the two of them. There is no reliable evidence of that. Both of them denied it in the years when they were asked. John Wayne, at the time of Angel and the Bad Man, was married to his second wife, Esperanza Bauer. And however troubled that marriage was, and it was very troubled, and we will get to it, there is no documentary evidence that he ever had a physical relationship with Gail Russell. What passed between them was something else, something quieter, and in some ways, something more important. What passed between them was friendship. And the reason I want to spend some time on this is because in Gail Russell's short, difficult life, real friendships were rare. Real friendships from powerful people who wanted nothing from her in return were rarer still. What John Wayne did for her over the 15 years that they knew each other is one of the small, quiet, honorable things in the history of that town, and it deserves to be told properly. They started shooting Angel and the Bad Man in 1946, with location work in Arizona and in the Monument Valley country associated with the Utah-Arizona border. She was 21 years old. She had been a professional actress for 3 years, and by every account of the people who were on that set, she was, on the first day, frightened out of her mind. This was not a Paramount picture. This was a John Wayne picture. He was the producer, he was the star, and the young woman who had spent her career being handed drinks to get her through scenes was now working for a man who had a reputation for being demanding, direct, and impatient with people who could not do the job. What happened next has been reported in several places, and the most reliable versions come from crew members who spoke on the record in later years. Some in interviews with film historians in the 1970s, some in memoirs, some in the oral history collections that libraries and archives began putting together in the last decades of the 20th century. So this is not one person's memory. This is a picture that has emerged from multiple independent sources, which is about as close to fact as this kind of Hollywood history ever gets. The safest version of what happened on that production is less cinematic than some later retellings, but it is still important. Wayne befriended her. People who wrote about the relationship later consistently described him as taking an interest in the problems that surrounded her career, and that interest did not end when the picture wrapped. What cannot be documented with the same confidence are some of the precise scenes that have accumulated around the story. The idea that he personally introduced her to every crew member, rearranged an entire schedule for her, or issued a dramatic order forbidding anyone to bring her a drink. Those details belong to the softer edge of Hollywood memory. What the screen gives us is something firmer. Gail Russell worked. She played Penelope Worth, the Quaker woman whose moral certainty slowly changes the wounded gunfighter Quirt Evans. The role asks for exactly what Russell could do best. Penelope does not dominate scenes by force. She watches, she waits, she believes. Her stillness becomes part of the film's moral argument. Wayne's own screen personality was already enormous by then. He could fill a frame simply by walking into it. Russell does something almost opposite. She draws attention by refusing to compete for it. Put the two qualities together and the contrast becomes the relationship. He is movement, she is stillness. He is a man accustomed to imposing himself on the world. She plays a woman whose certainty makes him stop long enough to look at another way of living. That is why the friendship behind the camera matters even without embellishment. Wayne was powerful, experienced, and comfortable in the environment. Russell was younger, anxious, and already developing a reputation for difficulties that people in the industry could see but did not know how to solve. He could not cure her, and there is no reason to pretend that he did. But he remembered her. More important, years later, when remembering her actually cost something professionally, he acted on that memory by helping to bring her back to the screen. There is also a useful distinction here between friendship and rescue. Hollywood stories like to turn a powerful man into the one person who saves a troubled woman. Gail Russell's life does not support that kind of ending. Wayne could offer kindness, advice, work, and loyalty. He could not live her life for her. He could not remove the anxiety from her body. He could not make sobriety permanent. And he could not change the fact that every day she left a supportive set, she returned to the same larger industry and the same private struggles. The friendship is more meaningful if we refuse to make it magical. It was a human connection inside a system that often treated people as replaceable. It gave Gail at least one influential colleague who continued to think of her as an actress rather than simply as a problem. Years later, when her career had nearly disappeared, that distinction would matter. And on Angel and the Bad Man, what mattered immediately was that she finished the picture and gave a performance that remains one of the clearest demonstrations of her screen gift. Watch her face when Penelope listens to Quirt. Watch how little she needs to do. Nothing in those scenes requires us to invent a heroic story behind the camera. The work itself is enough. She got through Angel and the Bad Man. She delivered a performance that many viewers, then and now, regard as one of the finest of her career. If you have never seen the film and you want to understand what she was actually capable of when she was not being poisoned by her own working conditions, watch that picture. Watch the scenes between her and Wayne. Watch the quality of attention on her face. That is a real actress doing real work in an environment where somebody had finally treated her like a person. The film was released in 1947. It made money. It was well received. and Gail Russell went back to Paramount, back to the Paramount system, back to the shooting schedule that would not slow down for her, back to the assistants who did not have John Wayne standing over their shoulders. And within a few years, what she had built up on that Arizona location began to come apart again. But he did not forget her. That is the important part. Later evidence supports the broad shape of a friendship that survived the production and survived the gossip that eventually attached their names to one another. Wayne's most important documented act of support was professional. When Russell had been away from films for years and her reputation had become a liability, his company put her back in a major role in 7 Men from Now. That is more solid and in some ways more meaningful than the many private anecdotes that accumulated afterward. We do not need to imagine secret rescues or a constant stream of money and phone calls to understand that he cared about what happened to her. The film exists, the casting exists, the comeback exists. He had enough influence to give an actress whom other producers considered risky another chance to stand in front of a camera, and he used it. He was not her lover, as both of them publicly denied the affair allegations that later surfaced. He was not her savior, because the rest of her life makes painfully clear that no friend could solve the problem she was fighting. But he was a friend with the ability, at least once, to turn concern into work. In Hollywood, where sympathy is easy and a job is expensive, that distinction matters. I want to move forward now, because there is a lot of ground to cover, but hold on to the essential image rather than the legend. A shy young actress on location, working opposite a far more powerful star who would remember her years later when her career needed another chance. As the story gets darker, that friendship will remain important, but it will stay where the evidence puts it, as one real human connection inside a much larger and more complicated life. After Angel and the Badman, Paramount put her right back into the schedule. She made Calcutta, she made Variety Girl. She made Night Has 1,000 Eyes, opposite Edward G. Robinson, which is a genuinely strange and interesting picture and worth finding if you like the darker corners of the 1940s. She made Song of India. She made Wake of the Red Witch, again with John Wayne, released in 1948. And through all of it, the pattern that had taken hold during her early career, especially around the difficult production of The Uninvited, remained a danger. Anxiety before the scenes, alcohol increasingly associated with relief, nights spent trying to recover enough calm to face the next morning's call. In 1949, she got married. His name was Guy Madison. He was an actor. He was tall, handsome, quiet, a former Coast Guard sailor who had drifted into pictures the way a lot of young men drifted into pictures after the war. He would later become famous playing Wild Bill Hickok on television in the 1950s. But at the time he married Gail, he was still finding his way. They had met on the Paramount lot. They had dated in a low-key way for about a year. And on July 31st, 1949, they got married in a small ceremony. The press treated it as a fairy tale. 2 beautiful young actors, both 20-something, starting a life together in Hollywood. The magazines ran spreads, the columnists wrote sentimental paragraphs, and the marriage, from the very beginning, was in trouble. Again, the record needs care here, because a lot of what has been written about the Russell-Madison marriage was written by gossip columnists who did not know either of them, and some of it is unreliable. What is reliable, because it comes from the divorce records themselves and from statements both parties made publicly, is this. The marriage was strained by her drinking. It was strained by her career. It was strained by the ordinary difficulty that 2 young, damaged people can have when they try to build a life together while both of them are still figuring out who they are. Guy Madison, by all accounts, tried. He was not a bad man. He was not a villain in this story. He was a young husband in his mid-20s who did not know how to help his wife and who eventually could not stay. The marriage began to fracture early. They separated for a time not long after the wedding, tried again, and eventually separated permanently. By the end of 1953, their marriage was effectively over. The divorce was finalized in 1954. In the legal filings, each side used the conventional language available to divorcing couples in that period. Russell accused Madison of mental cruelty. Madison's own complaint described a household made difficult by her emotional condition and by the way she withdrew from ordinary domestic life. The surviving reports do not give us a simple villain. That matters. Guy Madison was not the man who caused Gail Russell's alcoholism, and Gail was not merely the difficult wife described in a court complaint. They were two young people whose marriage was carrying pressures it could not contain. Her drinking was getting worse. Her career had slowed. His career was moving in another direction. Private distress was becoming public material. Before the divorce was complete, the drinking had already produced legal trouble. In November of 1953, Santa Monica police arrested Russell on suspicion of drunk driving after an encounter at a traffic light. She spent the night in jail. In January of the following year, she pleaded guilty to a drunkenness charge and was fined, placed under restrictions, and ordered to stay away from intoxicants and night spots for a period of probation. The drunk driving matter remained part of the legal process. Those reports are uncomfortable to read because the transformation of her public image is happening in real time. Only a few years earlier, newspapers had written about the dark-eyed young actress from The Uninvited. Now the same papers were printing photographs of her leaving court. The publicity machine had not changed its appetite. It had simply changed what it found useful about her. In 1954, another crisis followed. Russell was hospitalized with hepatitis, and accounts from the period describe a serious episode that left her physically depleted. Her marriage ended while she was still struggling to recover. In the language of a studio biography, this would be the point where the heroine disappears, heals, and comes back transformed. Real life was much messier. In early 1955, she was involved in another automobile incident and later faced a hit-and-run charge. The case produced another fine and another round of headlines. A civil claim followed and was later settled. None of these incidents, taken one at a time, ended her career. Together, however, they reinforced the industry's growing belief that hiring Gail Russell meant taking a risk. And still, she wanted to work again. That is easy to miss if we tell her life only as a descent. She had not entered Hollywood because acting was her childhood dream, but by the middle of the 1950s, the profession had become part of her identity. She knew what it felt like to be good in a scene. She knew that the frightened girl Paramount had signed had, somehow, become an actress. Losing the work did not simply mean losing money. It meant losing one of the few places where years of fear had occasionally turned into something beautiful. So the next important date is not the crash that would come later. It is 1955, when John Wayne's company tested her for a western called 7 Men from Now. Newspaper accounts from the period treated the test itself as news because Russell had been absent from the screen for years. When the production went on location near Lone Pine, California, local enthusiasm greeted the idea that Gail Russell was back. She was not back because every problem had been solved. She was back because somebody was willing to put her in a film and because she was willing to try. That is a more precarious kind of comeback than the movies usually give us. There is no triumphant montage. There is only a woman who has been in court, in hospitals, and out of work, standing once again where she had always been frightened to stand, in front of a camera. And this time, the camera would prove that the talent had not disappeared. To understand what John Wayne did for Gail Russell in the second half of the 1950s, you have to understand what Hollywood was like in the second half of the 1950s. Because the town she had entered as a 17-year-old girl in 1942 was not the town she was living in when another alcohol-related crash put her back in the headlines in 1957. It had changed. And the change was not kind to people like her. In 1948, 3 years after the end of the war, the Supreme Court of the United States handed down a decision in a case called United States versus Paramount Pictures. I'm not going to bore you with the legal details because this is not a law lecture. But I do want to explain the basic thing that happened, because it matters for our story. Before that decision, the big Hollywood studios owned everything. They made the pictures, they distributed the pictures, and they owned the movie theaters that showed the pictures. It was a closed system. The government had challenged the studio's vertically integrated system under antitrust law, and the Supreme Court decision forced major changes, including the separation of production and distribution from theater ownership. The studios were forced to sell off their theater chains, and with that decision, the whole economic foundation of the old Hollywood began to crack. By the early 1950s, television was in every living room. Ticket sales were falling. The studios were cutting costs, dropping contract players, closing down their in-house training and publicity operations. The system that had signed a 17-year-old Gail Russell to a 7-year contract in 1942, the system that had, whatever its terrible flaws, at least kept her employed and covered up her problems, that whole system was falling apart.
And an actress in her late 20s with a drinking problem, with a public arrest record, with a reputation among producers for being unreliable on set, was exactly the kind of employee that the new, leaner Hollywood was in no hurry to hire. She stopped getting called for pictures. It was not a formal blacklisting. It was quieter than that. It was the slow, ordinary way that an actor's career ends in that town. The phone rings a little less often. The scripts stop arriving. The agent takes longer to call back. And one morning you wake up and realize that months have gone by since you have worked, and nobody has said anything, and there is nothing to say, because nobody made a decision. It just happened. She sold her house. She moved into smaller apartments. The money, which had never been huge to begin with, because studio contracts in that era paid a lot less than people today assume, the money began to run out. And in the middle of all of this, the drinking got worse, because the drinking always gets worse in situations like this. That is the terrible logic of the disease. She was also, in this period, being hunted by the scandal magazines. And I want to talk about this because it is a part of the story of 1950s Hollywood that most people today have forgotten. There was a magazine called Confidential. It was founded in 1952 by a man named Robert Harrison, and by the middle of the decade, its circulation had climbed into the millions of copies per issue, making it one of the most notorious and widely read scandal publications in America. Its entire business model was digging up dirt on movie stars. Affairs, arrests, drug use, sexual scandals, anything. It ran on tips from private investigators, from bribed hotel staff, from ex-lovers, from anyone who would sell a story. And Gail Russell, with her arrests and her drinking and her broken marriage, was the exact kind of story it was designed to sell. She could not answer them. She did not have the money for lawyers, and even if she had, suing Confidential was, in that era, a losing proposition. The magazine had beaten several lawsuits, and going to court just meant more publicity. So the stories ran. And every time one ran, the phone rang a little less. And the small circle of people who would still take her calls got a little smaller. But John Wayne kept taking her calls. I want to be careful about this because I do not want to turn him into a plaster saint. He was not a saint. He had his own problems in this period. His second marriage, to Esperanza Bauer, had ended in a brutal, ugly divorce in 1954. A divorce in which Esperanza, in open court, made accusations against him that were reported in every paper in the country, including, at one point, an accusation that he had been unfaithful with Gail Russell. That accusation was denied by both of them, and no evidence was ever produced to support it, and most serious biographers of both Wayne and Russell have concluded that it was not true. What is documented is that the accusation itself was made in public in a courtroom, and that it dragged Gail Russell's name back into the papers at exactly the moment when she was least able to defend it. Whatever the truth of Wayne's troubled marriage, the accusation pulled Gail's name into a public fight that was not hers. She and Wayne denied the affair allegation, and the allegation itself should not be turned into evidence that a romance existed.
It is one of those cases where repetition can make gossip feel like fact if a biographer is not careful. What matters for Gail's story is what can actually be demonstrated afterward. Wayne's company was involved in giving her the role that returned her to films. That action does not require us to assign him a hidden motive. Perhaps he felt loyalty. Perhaps he admired her work. Perhaps he simply believed she deserved another chance. We cannot read his mind. We can see the result. What he did in 1956 was cast her in a picture. The picture was called 7 Men from Now. It was a Western. It was directed by a young, sharp-eyed filmmaker named Bud Boddicker, who would go on, over the next 4 years, to make a series of low-budget Westerns with Randolph Scott that are now considered some of the best American films of the 1950s. 7 Men from Now was the first of them. It was produced by Jack Productions, which was John Wayne's company. Wayne himself was not in the picture. The lead went to Randolph Scott, but Wayne was producing it, and Wayne had a say in the casting. And Wayne put Gail Russell in it. She had not made a feature film in roughly 5 years. Her name had been associated more often with court reports and illness than with new pictures. That alone made the casting unusual. Wayne's Jack company had known her work from the 2 films they had made together, and the part of Annie Greer offered exactly the kind of quiet, emotional material Russell could still handle beautifully. Bud Boddicker directed the picture. Randolph Scott played the former lawman Ben Stride, and Lee Marvin supplied the film with one of its great, dangerous supporting performances. Russell's role could easily have become decorative in a lesser Western. Instead, Annie is central to the film's emotional structure. She is married, vulnerable, increasingly aware of the strength and loneliness of Scott's character, and caught inside tensions that are expressed more often in glances than speeches. That kind of acting was where Russell had always been strongest. She did not need to dominate a scene verbally. She could let the audience see thought pass across her face. Boddicker's spare style gave her room to do exactly that. The result is one of the reasons 7 Men from Now is still discussed as more than a routine Western. The production also mattered because it tested an industry assumption. Gail Russell had become known as unreliable, yet she completed the picture. Contemporary reports from the comeback period describe how long it had been since she had worked and how determined she was to prove she could do it again. The simple fact that the film was finished and that her performance was good challenged the idea that her professional life was already over. For a moment, it looked as if she might come back. And when 7 Men from Now was released in 1956, critics and later film historians had reason to notice her all over again. For a moment, it looked as if she might come back. She got a few more offers. She made a picture called The Tattered Dress in 1957, opposite Jeff Chandler. She made another one called No Place to Land, released in 1958. She was working again. Not much. Not the way she had worked in 1945, but working. And then came the crash on Beverly Boulevard. This is one of the incidents in Gail Russell's life that later retellings have sometimes blurred. The contemporary record is precise. In the early morning hours of July 5, 1957, Russell's convertible crashed into the front of Jan's coffee shop at 8424 Beverly Boulevard in Los Angeles. The accident injured a janitor who was working at the restaurant. Police gave Russell a sobriety test, which she failed, and she was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence. The photographs taken afterward were devastating in the way newspaper photographs can be devastating. They reduced years of private illness and professional struggle to one image that readers could understand in a second. A beautiful former star, a damaged car, police, another headline. There was nothing glamorous about it. A man had been hurt. Russell had driven after drinking. The legal consequences were real, and so were the professional ones. She eventually received a fine, a suspended jail sentence, and probation. The injured worker also pursued a civil claim. The important thing is not to soften responsibility. By this point, Russell's drinking was no longer only hurting her. Getting behind the wheel made it dangerous to strangers. That is part of the truth of addiction too. Sympathy for the person suffering does not require pretending that the suffering harms no one else. But the other truth is that the public saw only fragments. Readers who encountered the photograph did not see the years of stage fright, the treatment attempts, the earlier hospitalization, the failed marriage, or the fragile comeback. They saw the crash. And for an actress whose public identity had already shifted from star to cautionary tale, the picture hardened the new image. The offers that had begun to return became harder to find again. The film business had never been generous about second chances, and a second comeback was more difficult than the first. No amount of goodwill from old friends could erase what producers and insurers saw when they looked at the file. The offers became scarcer, but the phone did not go completely silent. This is another place where the legend of Gail Russell as a woman totally abandoned by Hollywood becomes too neat. Her career was badly damaged, but it did not end in 1957. She continued to look for work and, at intervals, she found it. She appeared in No Place to Land, released in 1958. Later she worked in television, including episodes of The Rebel and Manhunt in 1960. Those appearances were not a restoration of her old Paramount stardom. They were smaller jobs in a changing industry. But they matter because they show that Russell was still trying. In an interview from the comeback period, she acknowledged that people still had doubts about her and spoke about wanting to prove that she could complete a picture. That sentence is more revealing than any invented scene of somebody rescuing her. Gail knew exactly what the industry thought. She knew the burden of proof was on her every time she walked onto a set. And she kept walking onto sets when she could. Her living circumstances became modest. By the end, she was living alone in a small residence in the Brentwood area of West Los Angeles. The grandeur that later generations associate with the words Hollywood star had little to do with her daily life. She had once been photographed in elaborate studio costumes under carefully shaped light. Now the scale of her world was smaller. A few rooms, familiar neighbors, periods of isolation, attempts at sobriety, and the art materials to which she repeatedly returned. John Wayne remained part of the history, but he should not be allowed to become the entire explanation for her later life. The strongest documented assistance he gave her was the chance represented by 7 Men from Now. After that, Gail's story is still Gail's story. She sought treatment. She relapsed. She tried to work. She took television roles. She returned to a low-budget feature. She was not simply waiting for one powerful friend to save her. That distinction gives her more agency, not less. Addiction narrowed her choices, damaged her body, and made employment increasingly difficult. Yet even within that narrowing world, she continued to make decisions. To try treatment, to return to acting, to paint, to appear before a camera again when a producer would hire her. The final years were not empty. They were unstable, diminished, and often lonely, but they were still years in which she was attempting to live. I do not want to overstate this. I have seen some accounts, in less careful sources, that make it sound as if John Wayne was some kind of full-time guardian for her in those years, and that is not accurate. He was a working movie star. He was making his own pictures. He was living his own life, which included his third marriage to Pilar Palette and his 3 young children by that marriage, and all the ordinary demands of a busy career. He was not, and could not have been, present all the time. What is accurate is that when she reached out, he answered. When she needed something and he could give it, he gave it. And when nobody else in Hollywood would speak her name in a positive way, he still did. She tried in these last years to get help. Contemporary reports and later biographical accounts describe periods of hospitalization and treatment connected with alcoholism and serious liver illness. She also tried to stop drinking more than once. The pattern did not hold. Sobriety would last for a time, and then the drinking would return. There is no need to turn that into a moral drama. Medically and humanly, relapse is one of the things that makes alcohol dependence so destructive. A person can understand what the substance is doing, fear the consequences, sincerely intend to stop, and still return to it. Gail's public record in the 1950s shows that cycle in painful fragments: arrest, court, treatment, work, another crisis, another attempt. And yet the later years also returned her to the interest she had before Paramount ever signed her. She painted and drew. Accounts of her private life describe art as something she continued to value when acting work had become uncertain. It is tempting, because this is a biography, to make that return feel symbolic, the movie star going back to the pencil she loved as a girl. Maybe it was symbolic to her, maybe it was simply something she enjoyed. We do not have to force a meaning onto it. What matters is that Gail Russell was more than the record of her arrests. She had a private, creative life that existed before the camera and survived after the studios largely stopped caring about her. The paintings and drawings did not receive the distribution her films received, but they belonged to the part of her identity she had chosen for herself. Some later retellings place a particular unfinished painting beside her at the end. I cannot verify that specific image well enough to present it as fact. The broader point is supported. She continued to make art, and the modest home in which she spent her last period of life was also a place where art supplies and her own work were part of the surroundings. That is enough. The real detail is already poignant without inventing a perfect final canvas. What I can tell you is what happened at the end. In the summer of 1961, she was 36 years old and living quietly in West Los Angeles. But contrary to the image of a woman who had been completely absent from the screen for years, Gail Russell had only recently made one more film. The Silent Call, a modest drama distributed by 20th Century Fox, was released in May of that year. The American Film Institute identifies it as her final film. It was not a major comeback picture. It did not restore her to the position she had held in the 1940s. But its existence changes the emotional shape of the ending. Gail Russell did not spend the last 3 years of her life doing nothing while Hollywood forgot her. She worked when she could. She appeared on television. She returned to a feature. Only months before her death, audiences could still see a new Gail Russell performance. That matters because decline is rarely a straight line. People disappear and return. They relapse and recover for a while. They lose work and then find a small job. A life that looks simple when summarized in an obituary is often full of these reversals when you look closely. Gail's last years were not a clean descent from fame to oblivion. They were a struggle in which there were still small professional victories, even if none of them was strong enough to reverse the larger damage. By August, however, her health was precarious. She lived alone. Neighbors knew her well enough to notice when they had not seen her for several days. Late on Saturday, August 26th, 2 women went to check on her. They found her on the floor. An empty vodka bottle was near her, and other empty bottles were reported in the residence. Police initially told reporters that the death appeared natural. The medical findings would later connect it directly to the long illness that had shaped so much of her adult life. There was no hidden crime waiting to be solved, no secret Hollywood plot, no final scandal bigger than the one the record already contained. There was a 36-year-old woman whose body had been damaged by years of alcohol dependence, found in the quiet rooms where she had been living. What happened after her death is worth telling too, but not because it reveals a secret act by John Wayne. The documented funeral record points in another direction. It shows that some of the people from Gail's own generation of Hollywood work remembered her and came to say goodbye. And in a story that has often been reduced to the men around her, that is where I want the focus to stay. On Gail Russell, the actress they had known, and the woman they had come to bury. When we return now to that Saturday night in August, the scene is less elaborate than some later versions have made it. 2 women neighbors, concerned because they had not seen Gail for several days, went to check on her. The contemporary Wire reports placed the discovery late on Saturday, not in the morning, and describe a small West Los Angeles residence rather than a mysterious locked room tableau. They found Gail Russell dead on the floor. Near her was an empty vodka bottle. police reported other empty bottles in the residence. There was no sign of a struggle and no immediate indication of violence. Early newspaper accounts therefore described the death as apparently natural, while the medical examination proceeded. The later findings made the underlying cause grimly clear. The death was attributed to severe acute and chronic alcoholism, with serious liver damage, and aspiration of stomach contents was listed as an additional terminal factor. Reports also noted malnutrition. In ordinary language, years of drinking had done profound physical damage, and at 36 her body could no longer absorb what was being asked of it. In ordinary English, years of alcohol dependence had damaged her liver and her general health, and the final episode happened while she was alone. There was no last public scene, no farewell interview, and no evidence in the medical or police record of a hidden murder. Nor does the record support turning her death into a deliberate suicide. The tragedy is difficult precisely because the mechanism was so familiar. When a beautiful young performer dies alone, especially in Hollywood, later generations tend to build mysteries around the silence. Gail Russell does not need that kind of mythology. The documented story is already severe enough. Her stage fright had become linked to alcohol very early in her career, with Lewis Allen placing that beginning during The Uninvited. Over the years, what had functioned as a quick way to calm fear became an illness that affected her marriage, her work, her legal record, her health, and finally, her survival. That does not mean one studio employee killed her by suggesting a drink, and it does not mean every person who failed to stop her was a villain. Human beings are not equations. Gail made choices. Other people made choices around her. The studio system rewarded whatever got the day's work finished. Alcohol was socially normal in her world. Treatment in the middle of the 20th century was far less developed than it is now. All of those things can be true at once. If you see versions of her story online that promise a hidden plot, a secret lover who explains everything, or a mysterious death that authorities somehow fail to understand, be cautious. The surviving record points in a much sadder direction. The danger was visible for years. It appeared in courtrooms, hospitals, cancelled work, photographs, and the testimony of people who had watched her struggle. There was no final twist waiting behind the curtain. And there is something more terrible, in a way, about an ending that does not give us a single villain. A conspiracy lets us point at one person and imagine that, without that person, everything would have been different. Gail Russell's life is harder than that. It was shaped by temperament, illness, an unforgiving industry, social habits that normalized heavy drinking, personal decisions, missed opportunities, and imperfect attempts at help. The accumulated weight of those things is less satisfying as a story than a conspiracy. It is also closer to the truth. The news reached the wire services quickly. By Sunday and Monday, papers around the country were carrying the story. The obituaries followed the familiar Hollywood pattern. The early success, the marriage to Guy Madison, the drinking, the arrests, the fall from stardom. Some contemporary coverage was blunt enough to make the transition from movie star to has-been part of the headline itself. That is how public memory often works. A career containing more than 24 film appearances can be collapsed into 3 or 4 images. A face, a marriage, a police photograph, a bottle. The obituary becomes cleaner than the life because newspapers have limited space and readers are assumed to want a recognizable arc. Gail's drawings, her repeated attempts to work again, the small television appearances, and the fact that her final feature had been released only months before her death were harder to fit into that shape. Her funeral and burial took place at Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood, where members of her family were also buried. The service was not a grand Hollywood spectacle, but it was not quite the empty ceremony later legend sometimes suggests either. Accounts of the funeral name old colleagues including Alan Ladd, Mona Freeman, Diana Lynn, and Jimmy Lydon among those who came. Those names matter because they return the story to Gail's own working life. These were people from the world in which she had spent her youth, people who had shared the strange experience of becoming public property under the studio system. Their presence is more securely documented than some of the sentimental stories that grew around the funeral afterward. One of those later stories says that John Wayne attended. Another says Guy Madison was there. The available contemporary accounts do not support those claims, and the better record of the service does not place either man among the mourners who were reported. There are also stories that Wayne quietly paid burial expenses. I cannot verify that well enough to present it as fact. And I think correcting that actually makes the friendship between Wayne and Russell more honest, not less. A friendship does not become real because someone appears in the final scene of a biography. Wayne's documented significance came earlier, when Gail was alive. They worked together, remained friends, and his company gave her the role in 7 Men from Now that allowed her to return to movies after years away. That is substantial. It does not need a funeral legend attached to it. Guy Madison's place in her life is also more complicated than a final graveside image. They had been married for 5 difficult years. The marriage ended. Both went on living. The fact that the record does not put him at the funeral does not erase the marriage or turn it into something crueler than it was. It simply means we should resist the temptation to arrange every important person in Gail's life around her grave for one final dramatic tableau. The people who did attend were enough. Family, old colleagues, friends from the years when her name had meant something very different in Hollywood. They came not to close a legend, but to bury a 36-year-old woman they had known. Her grave is modest. The marker carries the name Gail Russell Mosley, the married legal name connected to Guy Madison's birth surname, and the dates of a life that lasted less than 37 years. It does not need a grand inscription. Anyone who knows the films already knows what the stone cannot say. And John Wayne belongs in the story too, but where the evidence puts him, not necessarily standing at the grave, not secretly paying for a scene we cannot document, but earlier, beside her on film, and later, behind a production that gave her another chance. Not a lover, not a savior. A friend whose most important act of loyalty was done while she was still alive and still able to use it. Now, I want to take a step back, because we have been in close focus for a long time, and I want to zoom out and try to make sense of the whole shape of her life. Because when you tell a story like this, in this order, from the beginning to the end, there is a temptation to make it feel inevitable, to make it feel as if the ending was written into the beginning, as if the 17-year-old girl who walked into Paramount in 1942 was already, in some cosmic way, walking toward the apartment on her Brentwood residence in 1961. And I do not want to leave you with that feeling. Because it is not true. It was not inevitable. It never is. If, at any of a dozen points in her life, something had gone differently, everything else might have gone differently too. That is not sentimental speculation. It is simply the nature of a life made from choices, circumstances, health, temperament, luck, and other people's decisions. If a frightened young contract player in the 1940s had been offered effective treatment for severe anxiety instead of a quick chemical solution, perhaps the association between fear and alcohol would not have become so strong. If treatment for addiction had been more effective or more sustained later, perhaps one of her periods of sobriety would have lasted. If her career had provided steadier work after the studio system changed, perhaps isolation would have had less room to grow. If she herself had made different choices on certain nights, including the nights she drove after drinking, perhaps the public and professional consequences would have been different. None of those possibilities can be proven, because only one version of her life actually happened. And it is important not to rob Gail of agency by making her merely the passive victim of a machine. She was harmed by an industry that knew how to exploit beauty far better than it knew how to care for frightened young employees. She also made decisions, some of them dangerous, and other people were affected by those decisions. Both truths belong in the biography. That is why her life should not be turned into a simple morality play about wicked Hollywood. The old studio system could be disciplined, protective, exploitative, generous, and cruel, sometimes all in the same week. It gave Gail training, work, money, and the films that preserve her talent. It also demanded performance from a temperament badly suited to constant public exposure, and accepted short-term ways of getting that performance without understanding the long-term cost. The useful lesson is not that one institution murdered her. It is that systems can reward results while failing to notice what producing those results is doing to a person. Families can miss it. Friends can miss it. Employers can miss it. The person suffering can understand it and still be unable to stop it. That is more complicated than a villain, but it is also more recognizable. And because it is recognizable, it is not merely a tragedy from another era. It asks a question that remains current. When someone quiet is functioning well enough to keep producing, how long do the people around that person wait before asking what the functioning costs? That is one of the reasons her story matters. Not because she was the greatest actress of her generation, she was not, and she never got the chance to find out how good she could have become. Not because her death was mysterious, it was not. But because her life is a very clear, very well-documented case study of what happens to a certain kind of person when they are put into a certain kind of system without protection. And that is a story that is still being told, in different forms, in Hollywood and in a lot of other industries right now. I want to talk for a few minutes about her work, because we have spent a lot of time on the pain, and I do not want to leave you with the impression that the pain was all there was. She made, in her short career, more than 24 screen appearances, including roughly 24 feature films and later television work. Not all of them are worth watching. A lot of them were the ordinary industrial product of the Paramount system. Small dramas, small comedies, small mysteries, made fast, forgotten faster. But some of them are genuinely good, and a couple of them are, in my honest opinion, small masterpieces. The Uninvited, from 1944, is her most famous performance, and it deserves its reputation. If you like ghost stories, if you like the way the black and white photography of the 1940s could turn a Cornish coastal house into a place of genuine dread, if you like performances built on stillness rather than on volume, watch it. She was 19 when she shot it, 19, and she carries scenes opposite Ray Milland, who was one of the best actors in the business at that time. Watch what she does in the seance scene. Watch her face. That is not a 19-year-old girl acting frightened. That is a 19-year-old girl accessing something in herself that most actors twice her age would not have been able to reach. Whatever else you say about the studio system, it did put her in front of that camera, and the camera did catch what she was. Angel and the Bad Man, from 1947, is the other one I would send you to. It is a small western. It is quiet. Most people who watch it today expect a big John Wayne shoot-'em-up, and it is not that. It is a moral drama about violence and its alternatives, and it hangs entirely on the relationship between his character and hers. Watch the way she looks at him in the scenes at the family farm. Watch the way she does not act, the way she just is. That is what Wayne saw in her. That is what he protected on that set. And watching it today, more than 75 years later, you can still see exactly what he was protecting. Night Has a Thousand Eyes, from 1948, is a stranger film, a noir with a supernatural edge, adapted from a Cornell Woolrich novel, directed by John Farrow. Edward G. Robinson plays a stage mentalist who develops real powers, and Gail Russell plays the young woman whose fate he is trying to change. It is uneven, but it has moments that stay with you, and her performance is one of them. Wake of the Red Witch, also 1948, is her second picture with John Wayne. It is a big adventure picture, with sea battles and pearl diving and cursed treasure, and it is silly in places. But the scenes between the two of them have that same quality you see in Angel and the Bad Man, the sense of two people who have actually chosen to look at each other and to listen. And then, From the second phase of her career, there is 7 Men from Now, from 1956. Her comeback picture, produced through John Wayne's Badjack Company, the job that brought her back after years away from feature films. It is a lean, sharp western running a little under 80 minutes, and she is quietly heartbreaking in it. Knowing what you now know about what she had gone through to get to that set, and to stay sober through it, watching her in 7 Men from Now is a different kind of experience. She is not just playing a character. She is, in some small, private way, fighting for her own life on that screen. And she wins, at least for the duration of the film. That is worth something. That is worth a lot, actually. If you take away only one thing from this whole story, I would like it to be this. Go find one of her films, any of them. Watch her for 90 minutes. Do not watch the tragedy. Watch the actress. Because the tragedy is what happened to her, but the actress is what she made, in spite of it. And what she made is still here. It did not go away when she did. The world she lived in is almost entirely gone now. The Paramount contract system is gone. The studio publicity machine that manufactured her image is gone. The scandal magazines that hunted her are gone. Confidential folded in 1958, 3 years before she died, brought down by lawsuits and its own internal collapse. Most of the people who were on those sound stages with her, most of the crew members who watched her hands shake in the morning, most of the assistants who handed her the drinks, they are gone too. Guy Madison died in 1996. John Wayne died in 1979 of stomach cancer at the age of 72. But the films are here, and she is in them. And that is not nothing. I have one last thing I want to leave you with, because Gail Russell's story has accumulated the kind of beautiful legend that can easily become more memorable than the documented person. One later story says that John Wayne kept a private photograph of Gail in his home for years after her death. It is an affecting image. It is also one I cannot verify well enough to use as fact. And this story does not need it. There is already something more durable than a secret photograph. The films are here. Gail is in them. Not as a rumor, not as somebody's memory, but as photographed time. In The Uninvited, she is the frightened young performer somehow turning fear into screen presence. In Angel and the Bad Man, she is stillness beside John Wayne's physical force. In 7 Men from Now, after years away from feature films, she is older, more fragile, and still capable of making silence carry a scene. That is the evidence I trust most at the end. The studio system that frightened her also preserved her. It recorded the movement of her face, the seriousness of her attention, the unusual quality that made directors and audiences notice a young woman who had never dreamed of becoming an actress. The machinery could use people badly. It could also, almost accidentally, leave behind a record that outlived the machinery itself. And there is another image worth keeping, one that belongs entirely to Gail. A pencil, a brush, art materials on a table. We cannot identify a particular unfinished painting from the night she died, and we should not pretend that we can. But painting and drawing were real parts of her life. They existed before Paramount and remained after her career had become uncertain. The girl who wanted to make pictures never disappeared completely inside the woman whose face was being photographed. That matters because Gail Russell's life was not only a warning. It contained work, friendship, mistakes, responsibility, illness, attempts at recovery, and repeated efforts to begin again. She was not simply a helpless victim of Hollywood. She was not simply a drunk who destroyed her own career. She was not the secret lover from somebody else's divorce case. She was not the beautiful corpse in a sensational ending. Every one of those versions is too small. She was a specific person. Betty Gail Russell, born in Chicago in September of 1924. A shy girl who wanted to become a commercial artist. A teenager signed by Paramount because other people could see star quality in a face she would have preferred not to display. A young actress whose severe stage fright became linked to alcohol during the production of The Uninvited. a successful performer who made films with Ray Milland, Alan Ladd, Edward G. Robinson, John Wayne, Randolph Scott, and many others. A wife whose marriage to Guy Madison failed. A woman whose drinking led to courtrooms, hospitals, dangerous driving, and public humiliation. A patient who tried treatment. An actress who returned after years away. A woman who was still working in television and film near the end of her life. And she was 36 when that life ended. Her grave is in Valhalla Memorial Park in North Hollywood. The marker uses the name Gail Russell Mosley, the married surname connected to Guy Madison's legal family name, and records the short span between September 21, 1924 and August 26, 1961. It is a modest marker. It does not summarize her. No marker could. The people around Gail belong in the story, but none of them should own it. John Wayne matters because he worked with her, became her friend, and later helped create the professional opportunity that brought her back in 7 Men from Now. Guy Madison matters because he shared 5 difficult years of marriage with her. Lewis Allen matters because his recollections help us understand what happened when her fear and alcohol first became connected on a movie set. Bud Betteker matters because he directed one of her finest late performances. Alan Ladd, Mona Freeman, Diana Lynn, Jimmy Lydon, and the other colleagues who came to her funeral matter because their presence reminds us that she had not vanished from every human memory. But none of them is the subject. Gail is. When you spend time with a life like hers, the temptation is to make the ending explain everything that came before it. Do not. The empty bottle does not explain the uninvited. The police photograph does not explain Angel and the bad man. The divorce does not explain the girl who drew. The grave does not explain the woman. Those things are part of the record, but they are not the whole record. So if you take one thing away from this story, let it be something simple. Go find one of her films. Watch the actress rather than the tragedy. Look at the face Hollywood noticed and ask what the publicity photographs could never tell you about the person behind it. Watch how little she sometimes needs to do. Watch the stillness. Watch the attention. Watch the moments when a young woman who was terrified of being observed somehow became completely alive because a camera was observing her. That is the contradiction at the center of Gail Russell's life, and perhaps the reason her work still has such power. She wanted to disappear from attention, yet attention preserved her. She wanted to draw pictures, yet she became a picture. She struggled against the demands of acting, yet acting produced the thing by which strangers can still know her more than 6 decades later. The rest of us can at least remember her accurately. We can acknowledge the illness without romanticizing it. We can acknowledge the harm she suffered without pretending she had no responsibility for choices that endangered herself and others. We can remember the people who helped without inventing rescues they did not perform. And we can refuse to turn an already extraordinary life into a legend simply because legend is easier to tell. Gail Russell does not need the legend. The work is enough. The life is enough. That is her story. Thank you for staying with it. If it meant something to you, share it with somebody who might remember her films, or with somebody who has never heard her name. And if you want more stories like this one, real lives from old Hollywood, told with the drama that belongs to them and without adding the drama that does not, stay around. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the quiet people in your life. And I will see you in the next one.